Hey, sixth graders. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about writing a strong conclusion. So remember, we know that the conclusion portion of the scientific method is all about explaining what your experiment proves. It's going to relate back to your hypothesis. The conclusion will also help you make decisions for future experiments. So it's where you're considering sources of errors in your experiment and then also some improvements that you could make to correct those errors. Last but not least, it's organized in the CER format. So there will be a claim, evidence to support your claim, and then you'll tie it all together with reasoning. So remember, we want to, in order to think like a scientist, use that CER model, and that's how we will organize our conclusions in our lab reports. So your conclusion will end up looking something like this. So you'll see in your claim, you want to start off by proving your hypothesis correct or incorrect. So you need to say something like, my hypothesis was correct or incorrect. And it's okay if it's incorrect. That will just inform maybe some things that you could do next time as well. It's okay for your hypothesis to be incorrect. You might then restate your hypothesis in your claim portion as well. In your evidence portion, you want to reference exact numbers. So you want to tell exactly how many of this type of catch that you caught and how many of the other type that you caught or missed. So you want to use exact numbers in your evidence portion, quantitative data. You also want to use some qualitative data. In your evidence section, here's where you should be as detailed as possible. In your reasoning, you need to explain yourself. So how does your evidence support your claim? Why does your evidence matter? And you can see on my screen right now in the reasoning portion that I have some sentence starters that you might use to help write that portion. And last but not least, we don't just have a CER, we kind of have like a CER plus. And that plus is the last section would be improvements and changes. So here's where you're thinking, what would you do differently if you were to do this lab again? What variables were maybe challenging to control? So think about your experiment, think about what you couldn't control 100% of the time, and that often leads to your improvements and changes. Now, a lot of times students will just say, well, if I could do this again, I would change the weather outside because there was a lot of wind. And then they just stop there. But what I'm looking for you to do is not only give a variable that was challenging to control, but give a way that you would control that variable if you were to do this experiment again. So always make sure you're pointing out some sort of flaw in your lab, but then identifying an improvement. How could you fix that in the future? On my screen again, I have some helpful sentence starters to help you scaffold this portion of your conclusion. Last but not least, when you turn in your conclusion, we should see clearly identified sections. So notice this student's conclusion section. I can see their claim because they've written the word claim. They've also underlined it to make it really stand out. I can see those same formatting choices that they made for it, the words evidence, reasoning, and improvements. What we don't want is just all one chunk of your conclusion. We do want to see these really clear portions to show your thinking in a logical and clear way.